Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of SUPD Presents Can You Talk Real Quick? This is my mini-pod, a short, efficiently produced conversation with an expert who knows a lot about an important issue that might be unfolding or that is static and long-standing, evergreen, and certainly that's the case on today's issue, which is, of course, climate change and the events that occurred on Monday in a Montana court. I'm really excited to welcome for the first time one of the most quoted experts I saw. Got him on short notice. That's the value of me and the show. Professor Michael Girard of the Ivy League, Columbia University's Sabin Center for Climate Change Law, one of the foremost environmental lawyers in the nation. Professor Michael Girard is my guest today on this really important issue. He didn't know who I was. I reached out to him. I said, can you talk real quick? He looked me up and boom, here we go. Able to turn it around. But here is the news. You know what? Let's let the gravitas of Lester Holt and NBC Nightly News that did cover this importantly at some point later in their nightly news broadcast take it from here.
It's official. July was the hottest month on record. NASA and NOAA scientists today confirming that last month smashed the previous record by more than 1/3 of a degree. A study last month found this summer's record-breaking heat would be, quote, virtually impossible without climate change. And in Montana today, a landmark court decision, a judge siding with a group of young people who accused the state of violating their rights by supporting fossil fuels. Ann Thompson joins us now. Ann, this could be a game changer.
It could, Lester, and it's a sweeping victory for the 16 young people who brought the case, the first of its kind to go to trial. A district judge ruled that their right to a clean and healthful environment, as guaranteed by Montana's constitution, was violated because the state prohibited agencies from taking climate change impacts into consideration when evaluating fossil fuel projects. The judge also ruled that the ban was unconstitutional. The judge found the state knew about the dangers of greenhouse gases from fossil fuels for at least 30 years, and that until the concentrations are reduced, she says young people will be unable to lead clean and healthy lives in Montana.
Thank you, Ann. Thank you, Lester. NBC News. I'll take it from here. Attorneys for the 16 plaintiffs, ranging in age from 5 to 22. I don't think the 5-year-old testified, but they presented evidence during the 2-week trial in June that increasing carbon dioxide emissions are driving hotter temperatures, more drought and wildfires, and decreased snowpack. The plaintiffs said that those changes were harming their mental and physical health, with wildfire smoke choking the air they breathe and drought drying out rivers that sustain agriculture, fish, wildlife, and recreation. Native Americans testifying for the plaintiffs said that climate change affects their ceremonies and traditional food sources. Let's just listen to a little brief testimony, just a couple quick clips of a couple of the young people who testified in this trial. This is actual testimony from the trial.
You know, it's really scary seeing what you care for disappear right in front of your eyes.
How does it make you feel knowing that the state is not considering climate impacts in its permitting decisions?
Makes me feel like the state is prioritizing profits over people because they know that there is visible harm coming to the land and to the people, and they're still choosing to make money instead of care for Montanans.
Powerful testimony, including from Ryan Bussey's kids. Ryan is a friend of mine, a friend of the show, the author of Gunfight, former firearms manufacturer executive. His sons that if you follow him on social media, he's always tweeting about his family and how much they love to hunt and fish and live in Montana. They were two of the plaintiffs. I'm going to probably talk to them on Wednesday. Such a big deal. Quickly to some reaction, then to my guest. Senator Bernie Sanders says, thank you to these brave young people who today won an enormous victory against climate change in their home state of Montana. It's time for the federal government to follow their example and file lawsuits to hold the fossil fuel industry accountable for the role in the climate crisis. Not bad, huh? Leading climate activist and writer Bill McKibben tweeted, huge win in Montana, of all places, as judge rules kids have a right to a safe climate. The state has more coal than any state in the country and has never denied a fossil fuel permit. But change is coming. Julia Olson is the chief legal counsel and executive director of the organization that brought this suit called Our Children's Trust. And she said, today's ruling in Montana is a game changer that marks a turning point in this generation's efforts to save the planet from the devastating effects of human-caused climate chaos. This is a huge win for Montana, for youth, for democracy, and for our climate. More rulings like this will certainly come. And the Republican Attorney General against this, they argued against this guy named Austin Knudson's office, called the ruling absurd, but not surprising. Emily Atkin, climate journalist of Heated.World, who I love, writes, a Montana judge has ruled in favor of youth plaintiffs suing their government for ignoring climate change. And then she quoted Michael Gerard when he said, I think this is the strongest decision on climate change ever issued by any court. He's the head of the Sabin Center. If he's good enough for Emily Atkin, he's good enough for me. I vetted him, he vetted me, and he joins me here on the show right now. He's the Anders Sabin Professor of Professional Practice at Columbia University Law School, founder and faculty director of the groundbreaking Sabin Center for Climate Change Law, writes and teaches courses in environmental law, climate change law, and energy regulation. Prolific author, has written or edited 14 books. He's a really big get for me, and here is the 15-minute conversation I had with him about how important this case is. And for Professor Michael Gerard's Twitter and social media links, check today's show notes. Professor Michael Gerard, Columbia University. Can you talk real quick?
And there he is now. A big deal to get you on the show, sir. Really appreciate your time. I'm sure you're getting a lot of requests. Thanks for joining us.
Happy to.
This is a huge day. You've been following this case and this issue your entire career. How do you put it into kind of a layman's term for those of us that have been so concerned about this issue? What happened with these young people, this case, and the state of Montana?
Well, this is the first time, actually the second time other than 2007, that there's been a trial on climate science, where you had climate scientists on the stand subject to cross-examination. And the court ruled for the climate scientists. It ruled that fossil fuels are the principal cause of climate change, that climate change is causing very serious health and environmental problems today, and it's going to get worse. And the court also found that there are much cheaper available alternatives, the wind and solar and hydro. So it was a very important decision.
It's interesting that the court weighs in on alternative energy and alternative economic ways to provide energy to the state. How do they get to do that? I guess, how does the judge know such a thing? Experts?
Yeah, there were experts who testified at the trial for the plaintiffs, and the defendants had an expert who didn't say a whole lot, but the judge believed the plaintiff's expert on that.
Montana's an interesting state. It's an important state because of something in the Constitution regarding environment. Apparently, there's similar wording in Hawaii's Constitution, which is why there is a similar case in Hawaii. We also need to talk about the rest of the world and of course, why that matters. But tell us why these cases are being brought by the organization, the plaintiffs in both Montana and Hawaii.
Well, Montana and Hawaii are two of the 6 states that have environmental rights provisions in their state constitutions. The same group, Our Children's Trust, that brought these cases has also brought a number of others. Those were brought under different theories and so far haven't done so well. It turns out that having an environmental provision of the state constitution makes all the difference.
Yeah. What does that provision say? How is it argued by the plaintiffs in this case?
It basically says that every person has a right to a clean and healthful environment. And so when the state legislature in Montana passed a law saying that the state officials may not consider climate change when deciding on energy policy, the court said that violates this environmental rights provision of the state constitution.
What does this mean for the rest of the world? The legal structures are different in different countries. There is no one global court that decides on these things. How does the rest of the world, have they been reacting? Are they ahead of us? Are they behind us? How does it matter?
Well, there are about 150 other countries that have environmental rights provisions of some sort in their constitutions. And we've already seen decisions from the courts in a number of other countries saying that either the constitutional provision or human rights treaties to which they've signed on or other legal doctrines mean that those governments need to do more than they have been doing to fight climate change. So in the Netherlands and Germany and France and Brazil and Mexico and Nepal and a number of other countries, we have court decisions that are directing their national governments to do more on climate change.
Talk to me about the Juliana case. There's a lot going on. We're talking about, obviously, climate law, talking about the case in Montana, of course, primarily because this was decided today, but there are other cases to speak of.
So the Juliana case was brought in federal court in Oregon. seeking an order that the federal government come up with and implement a plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. The trial judge wanted it to go to trial. It went back and forth quite a few times, but ultimately the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals said no. In a 2-1 decision, the court said, even though we agree with the plaintiffs about the causes and impacts of climate change, it's not our job as judges to decide what ought to be done about it. That's up to the executive and Congress. So the plaintiffs then went back and moved to amend their complaint for less strong relief. Rather than requiring the federal government to come up with and implement a plan, they just said, we want, Judge, a declaration from the court about our rights. The trial court said, okay, you can go ahead and do that. The U.S. government is now appealing that to the Ninth Circuit, and we'll see where that goes.
Michael, I always try to temper my enthusiasm on these court decisions because of the makeup of the U.S. Supreme Court and their decisions being final. This is a Montana court, a first judicial district judge, Kathy Seeley, ruling on this. The plaintiffs didn't seek money in their lawsuit. Instead, they apparently sought for the court to declare that Montana's fossil fuel energy policies and actions violated these young people's state constitutional rights, these heroic, amazing young people. But the concern is, what about the next court, and then the next court, and the final court, which is run by people who may not, the majority would not be in favor, I'm guessing, of such a decision?
Well, actually, this will go to the state Supreme Court. The Attorney General of Montana has already said that, but that's where it ends because it's purely on state law, and the U.S. Supreme Court doesn't hear cases that are purely on state law. The Montana Supreme Court was asked by the state to stop this trial before it happened. They unanimously refused to do that. So that's a good sign. We don't know how it's going to turn out. But the plaintiffs could well win at the state Supreme Court. We'll see. But that's the end of it. It doesn't go to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Help me understand the strategy brought by this organization and why they use these young people. Maybe that's not the best choice of word, use. These young people were happy to be a part of this. It will be something that will be a huge part of their life. Ryan Bussey is a friend of mine. Both his sons were plaintiffs in this court. And talk to me about how the strategy here, even including the arguments, because the testimony from the young people was apparently really impactful. I watched some of it, listened to some of it. It was very dramatic and impactful. And then, as you mentioned, the arguments that were being made were pretty historic in terms of the science wasn't really something that the state of Montana wanted to argue.
That's right. The state of Montana had hired a climate expert, so to speak, to testify who was going to downplay the significance of climate change, but they ended up not calling her on the stand, I think, because they realized that would not go so well. The plaintiffs followed what turned out to be really a terrific strategy of putting a human face on this abstract-sounding global problem, having these young people talk about how climate change in Montana was affecting them personally through asthma, and they couldn't fish, they couldn't engage in their sports. They were facing wildfires, all kinds of things. That putting this human face on it, I think, really had an impact on the judge.
Really had an impact on the judge. I guess the question is, what impact does it have on the public? What impact does it have on Montana lawmakers, the attorney general there? Of course, I think I read that coal and gas are two of the biggest profitable industries in that state. So obviously, they carry a tremendous amount of influence, which is why they've been able to cause so many problems. And without having legal constraints, they're not going to be giving up, is my guess.
Yeah, no, I can't tell you that I'm confident that Montana is going to shut down its coal and oil and gas industries. The politics don't do that. They're going to have to consider climate change, but they could come out the same way as they had before. I think the practical impact of the decision is more outside of Montana, is more the fact that it'll be energizing activists around the U.S. and globally, and may lead to more similar kind of cases in other places.
I feel like I've seen so many different issues be argued in the courts by, the right and conservatives, whether it be about guns or climate or abortion. And they've been so organized for so many years that they strategize. They bring these cases in front of judges in times and states where they think they can win, much less the Supreme Court. it seems that's what Our Children's Trust did. It seems like that's exactly the strategy that environmentalists are using in courts. They're really organized and strategized. You've been watching this your whole career. What kind of grade or review or critique would you give this organization and the plaintiffs that argued it?
Oh, I'd give them an A for this, no question. I would say that the case was brilliantly tried by the lawyers. Now, it came after a lot of unsuccessful cases brought by the same group, but they've hit on a winning formula here.
Is the idea here, forgive me for not, this is where kind of my understanding and even prep on this issue runs out, but obviously the economic issue, regardless of climate change, is that when you pollute the environment, there are costs. There's different economic terminology for this, but the polluters haven't had to pay those costs, these economic factors, forever. Is there a place where you can continue to burn fossil fuels, but you got to pay for the economic costs and consequences that they cause to the health, the environment, coral, the ocean, and every other critter doesn't have a lobbyist to take care of them. And that's exactly what needs to be done here. If they're going to continue to be active, they're going to have to pay the bill, no?
Well, this case was not about that. And the plaintiffs were not seeking money damages. There are about 25 pending cases brought mostly by states and cities against the fossil fuel companies seeking money damages. All of those cases have been held up for years on procedural grounds. Some of them are moving forward. We'll see what happens with them. It would be mostly up to the Congress and the state legislatures to impose some kind of carbon tax or fee. The Inflation Reduction Act does include a fee on methane emissions, which is the first national carbon tax. And a number of states do have carbon taxes and charges. New York State is now developing a cap and invest program.
Do you think it'll work?
Yeah, I think it'll have a real impact if it goes through with the way its framers had in mind.
Great. Yeah, I've always heard about those different ideas, and in theory, they seem like they would work. And then sometimes in practice in different places, they haven't been as effective as my understanding. But that would be awesome if it did. What else would you say about this case and the future going forward in terms of the legal strategy or in terms of just kind of the momentum, the enthusiasm? I feel like in reading the reactions to this, including your own on Twitter, that this is really a huge, huge deal. And we mentioned earlier Hawaii, obviously the case that's happening there because their constitution, more importantly, the effect that we've seen them have, almost 100 people have died in this latest fire in Hawaii. How do you see moving forward, Michael, where the strategy lies, momentum?
Well, our center at Columbia tries to keep track of all the climate litigation in the world. So far, we've counted about 2,300 cases around the world. Now, not all of them are aimed at fighting climate change, but what we've seen over the last 3 or 4 years is a real upswing in these cases, especially outside the U.S. And all about 70% of the cases are in the U.S. But we've seen an upswing around the world, and many of the decisions, especially in other countries, go for the plaintiffs and saying that governments and companies need to do more about climate change. I think that this decision is going to be another shot in the arm for that. It's going to be energizing. There was a decision in the Netherlands a few years ago which sparked new cases. I think this will have a similar effect as the governments of the world, the executive branches and the legislatures continue to do much too little to fight climate change. People will increasingly resort to the courts. And I think some courts are increasingly saying, yeah, if nobody else is doing this, we will.
And what about the plaintiffs? How important in those other cases that you're working on and internationally is it that it's being led by young people? Because it's easy to dismiss the naivete and ignorance of young people, but it's not easy to dismiss what the most important or consequential impacts of climate change, who they are going to affect. It's these kids. Say what you want about their knowledge, what they know. You have these people as students at Columbia, I'm sure, they're a little bit older than I think most of these plaintiffs. Nonetheless, they are the ones who have the most interest in the outcome of all environmental issues, much less cases like this. How important is it that these cases are brought by young folks? Some of them are really young in this case.
Well, we've seen the judge with the Juliana case in Oregon, this judge. Some others have really picked up on that it's the young people who are going to be most effective affected by all of this, and therefore they should be listened to more closely. Not every court has that view. There are different rules on standing, as it's called, in different courts in the U.S. and around the world. But we've certainly seen that in some courts, this really has an impact.
Your center is really important, the Sabin Center for Climate Change Law at Columbia University, which is my understanding you founded or co-founded. It's a really important organization at Columbia. There's obviously a lot of other academic ones. There's environmental organizations. But I always settle on the idea that the fossil fuel industry has way more money than your school, even than the plaintiffs and so on. How much does money matter in trying these cases?
Well, it matters, but it's not everything. The merits also matter.
Yep.
And we saw in the Montana case that the plaintiffs' lawyers did a terrific job, and the state of Montana's lawyers were not able to mount an effective defense. So having money is helpful, but it's not the only thing that really matters.
It is so great to get your perspective. You've been doing great work for a really long time. The Sabin Center doing great work, and I really appreciate you talking to me on short notice. Hopefully, we can reach out to you again. This is a great day and a really great conversation. Thank you, Professor, for joining me.
Great talking to you. Thanks very much.
Well, how do you like that? Got him on the show real quick. The Washington Post was quoted him. Emily Atkin and everybody in between, referring to, amongst other experts, Michael Girard at Columbia Law School, and we got him on the show. I cannot do it without your support, though, so if you're not a paid subscriber, please sign up to support this series, which is called Can You Talk Real Quick, and let me know anytime you want, during the day, during the week, hey, could you reach out to so-and-so and have them on and have them explain what the hell is going on with this or that so-and-so on this or that. I think that would be a really, really interesting segment of Can You Talk Real Quick? All right, you can do better with your examples. Michael Girard, go follow him on Twitter at Michael Girard, and more in today's show notes. Thank you very much for listening, supporting the show. I'll talk to you later.
So long, you got the creaky knees, you got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know what's right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear when all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Oh, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of a stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up, and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up. darkness to the voice inside. And listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.